True horror stories. Mistreated dogs and their dark revenge. Dogs. Those creatures that brighten our lives with their unconditional companionship are faithful, beautiful, loving, loyal. But beware. Always treat them with love, and never ever, under any circumstances, hit them. I'm going to tell you 2 stories where animal abuse turned these kind animals into a karma impossible to contain. As the Doqmentalist, I have gathered a lot of information about extraordinary events with animals. And from different testimonies, I was able to obtain the necessary veracity to bring you the following stories. Draco, the German Shepherd of the Diaz family. Year 1991. Never hit a dog. Hipólito Diaz was a good retired policeman who had dedicated his whole life to the service of the people. His fiancée died before they were married, and the man never fell in love again. All his love he poured into his dogs and how to train them for work on the force. Before he died of cancer in 1988, he had a German Shepherd named Draco, who had accompanied him for the last 5 years of his illness. The affection was mutual. The respect was mutual. As an exemplary policeman, Hippolyte had stuck to following the rules of society and justice. He hated anything illegal, clandestine, or dubious. These values he was able to instill in Draco through well-developed training to serve and protect the helpless. In the dining room, surrounded by the medals and plaques for outstanding performance of duty, was a picture of the German Shepherd with the caption, "When man goes bad, they call him dog." What an offense to my dog to compare him to a bad man. The news of Don Hipólito's death transcended the borders of the village. The whole force attended his funeral, and the most heartfelt speech was given by retired Major Bustos Martinez, longtime companion of the deceased. In front of his coffin, he said emotionally, "We were united by our fight against injustice and our love for dogs. Draco will miss you as much as we will." Within hours, the news reached the ears of Jacinto Diaz, the nephew and only relative of the deceased, who, in accordance with the laws of the place, immediately came forward to claim his uncle Hipólito's house. Unlike his policeman relative, Jacinto had, in his 35 years, undertaken all sorts of business ventures and practiced numerous trades that were at odds with the law. It was easy to understand why they did not speak to each other. The truth is that on entering his uncle's house to take possession of his inheritance, he found Draco devastated by the death of his beloved Hippolytus. And he also found a handwritten letter that the relative had left him with the following message. Nephew Hyacinth, if you are reading this, it is because you have claimed the property. With God's favor, change your life. Take advantage of this opportunity to have a decent roof over your head and good neighbors to straighten yourself out and be a good man. I ask you to take care of Draco. He will help you. He is helpful and obedient. To gain his trust, follow these 3 rules with rigorous observance. Feed him well. Let him go for walks. Never, no matter what he does, but never hit him. I trained him to serve and protect, and that would be catastrophic to his gentle spirit. Enjoy the house, the garden, and Draco. Find honest work and stay away from bad company. Signed, your uncle, retired Major Hipólito Diaz. Jacinto, far from being moved by his relatives' good wishes and trying to follow his recommendations, turned the house into a den, a kind of illegal tavern where the worst people in the region gathered. Draco was assigned to a small unlit broom closet under the staircase, where he only brought him leftover food. The animal barked constantly, begging to be taken out of there. He cried in broken howls but got no response. The evil nephew rarely remembered to give it water and fed it less and less. 4 months later, when the house had become quite popular with the underworld, a customer came to the tavern. He was a ruthless old man nicknamed Maldad, and he complained to Jacinto about the noises the animal was making. He said to him, "You must teach him a lesson. If he's going to howl like that, at least break his front legs so that he can dance standing on his back legs and put on a good show." That dreadful idea kept running through his mind. Again and again he thought of the animal prancing on its hind legs from one side to the other and dancing for the customers while they threw coins at its head. 2 nights later, Jacinto became so intoxicated that he lost all connection with reality. With a prolonged ringing in his ears, he woke up, covered in blood and with a few cuts above his eyes. All the money and many drinks in the tavern had been stolen, and there was broken glass everywhere.
There is a knock on the door, but Draco no longer barks in his prison.
"Open up! It's the police! Police, open up or we'll break the door down!" Hyacinth tried to get out through a window, but the uniformed men came in and caught him. One of them said to him, "How is it possible that this filth is Major Hipólito's house? Aren't you ashamed to live in this filth with this nauseating smell?" They all respected Jacinto's uncle, but they knew about the misdeeds of the heir, who, accustomed to these procedures, did not respond to the officers. However, he noticed that something was wrong. The policemen looked him up and down, and the men's faces hardened. One pulled out his gun and pointed it at him, while another asked, "Where's all that blood on your trousers coming from, and what the hell are you carrying in that pocket? Take out whatever you have there slowly. Don't make me shoot you." Jacinto obeyed without understanding much. Very calmly he reached into his pocket, which was bulging and completely full of brownish-brown blood. He pulled out what was in it and showed it to the officers, who took a moment to realize what it was. The tallest of them, trembling, asked him, "Where is Don Hipólito's German Shepherd? Where is Draco? Speak, you wretch." But Jacinto Diaz still didn't answer. Then he received a violent blow on the head and was handcuffed. What was in his pocket slipped from his hand and fell to his side. He finally got a good look at it and realized that it was the fingers and palms of the dog's 2 front paws, covered in blood. One of the policemen heard a faint whimper coming from the broom closet under the stairs. As he opened the door and turned on the lights, he began to vomit. Draco was barely breathing. Both ends of his front paws were missing and he was bruised all over. A local newspaper reported the words of retired Major Bustos Martinez when asked about the scandal of the case. At the time, he said, "The decent thing to do would have been to shoot Jacinto Diaz for the barbarity he did to poor Draco. The man responsible for the torment suffered by the dog was charged with several crimes. However, they could not keep him in prison for more than 48 hours. The laws were different at the time, and a lawyer who was an expert in getting such scum out of jail came to represent him. He claimed that the animal was still alive and that there were no witnesses. Jacinto returned to the inherited house and gathered a few belongings to escape from the village, intending to return when the waters had calmed down. With his suitcase in hand, he opened the door to leave and was confronted by retired Major Bustos Martinez, who, despite his 68 years, looked strong enough to beat him with his bare fist. Glaring angrily at Jacinto, he thrust a book in Jacinto's face and warned him, "Don't ever come back. See this. It's a manual that your uncle and I wrote together, called Ancient Training Techniques for Attack Dogs. Of the hundreds of animals we trained, Draco was undoubtedly our best pupil, but we taught him wrong. We got it wrong. He was never going to defend himself or tear you apart until he heard our voice giving the right commands. That's why you were able to maim and maul him without him murdering you. If I see you again, you won't get out of here in one piece." Hyacinth had no respect for authority, so he smiled and before going on his way, replied ironically, "In a few months I'll come back and reopen this pigsty. But first I'll tell my lawyer to get my beloved little dog Draco back. And I'm going to hang a little bell around his neck so that he'll dance on 2 legs and go, tinkle, 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 every time he jumps up and down to dodge the coins that the customers throw at him for fun." For 2 years, nothing was heard of him except rumors. The neighbors said that Jacinto met the fate of the swindlers and ended up being the victim of another delinquent who left him penniless and, on top of that, gave him a severe beating. So he returned to his uncle's village and, with the help of a local partner, the one nicknamed Maldad, they reopened the tavern in the summer of 1991. It started one night. Maldad and Jacinto ended up drunk as usual. Then they heard it for the first time. A spectral sound coming from the gardens by the main window. Startled, they tried to find where the noise was coming from, but no one was there. The ominous little bell rang again on the second night, and this time, they saw it. From the bushes by the front door, Jacinto said to Maldad, "There it is, standing there, watching us. It has a hood and a long robe on. The thing that watched them froze their blood. In the shadows, they could clearly make out that it was watching them with its eyes shining like 2 lanterns. The men grabbed an axe, broke a bottle to use as a weapon and went out to meet it, shouting for courage, but it was no longer there. A few hours later, the fear had passed, and they continued to drink and tell anecdotes until, finally, they stumbled to their rooms and collapsed from the alcohol. A blood-curdling scream awakens the one they nicknamed Evil. It takes him a while to realize if he is still dreaming until he hears a groan of pain coming from Jacinto's room. Thinking that his friend had fallen down in his drunkenness, he opens the door and the first thing he sees is the man crawling on the floor, half his face and neck mangled, crying for help with his hand raised. His fingers had been torn off too. He bends down to help him, and at that instant he hears the infernal growl coming from behind him. Whatever had torn Hyacinth apart was in that very room. Evil began to cry and slowly turned around, his hands in the air. From the shadows, walking on two legs like an enraged bear, Draco, the big German shepherd, approached him, baring his huge bloody teeth, snarling and panting furiously. They have dressed him in a hood and a cloak as black as death itself. Two prosthetic limbs with long, thin blades have been attached to his amputated front legs. On his chest hangs a small bell. Maldad stands up and tries to hit it with his fist, but he is so frightened that he misses, and by a lot. Draco leapt up, latched onto his neck, and began to shake it again, and again, and again, and again, until it was ripped off, amidst screams of horror. The first customer to arrive at the tavern the next night found the bodies. The press spoke of a werewolf. It was clear from the footprints that the creature walked on two legs like a human, and the bites were consistent with those of a large animal. This year I traveled to gather more evidence for the investigation. One thing is certain: no one visits the graves of the two infamous people. They were dirty and destroyed. On the other hand, the relatives of retired Major Bustos Martinez, who died peacefully in 2004, gave me a lot of information, and I was able to put the facts together. I concluded that, after being amputated and brutally beaten, Draco recovered and was left in the care of the policeman, who spent 2 years training and preparing him to dispense justice without relying on a human order. How do I know this? Let me explain. I was also shown an old copy of the book that Hipólito Díaz and Bustos Martinez had written, the one entitled Ancient Training Techniques for Attack Dogs. There, on page 121, you can read: Canes Pugnaces, Battle Dogs. The Romans used attack dogs. Not only must we study their breeding techniques and bonding with the troops, it is essential to analyze that these conquerors trained them to perform missions without the assistance of humans, and attached great importance to the terror and confusion that these animals imposed on the enemy forces. To enhance this effect, they were often sent out at night and dressed in terrible costumes that gave them a sinister, almost supernatural appearance. P15 and P22, the Pitbulls of Route 8, year 2007. Never abandon a dog. This story narrates a succession of bad decisions. Pay attention. The village called Humidal had barely 60 inhabitants at the time and was located on a plain 2 kilometers from National Route 8. Heavily used by tourists going from the capital city to the mountains. However, every year, without exception, the intersection between the road junction and the road to the village was used by travelers to leave their dogs there and abandon them. You already know that this is a sad practice. People go on holiday and take the opportunity to leave their troublesome pets far away so that they can never return home. The chronicles say that the mayor of Humidal called an urgent meeting of the neighbors and spoke as follows. Unfortunately, we are going to take drastic measures. We have a pack of more than 12 large abandoned dogs that are causing havoc. We announced it in January. If one of us was attacked again, we would deal with it the hard way. Yesterday, Mrs. Rufino was knocked off her bike, and today morning, Benjamin, my son, was bitten when he was walking to school. We have to vote in assembly which of the 3 measures proposed in the previous meeting is the right one. It was not known whether it was a question of cost or a solution that could be sustained over several seasons, but they voted on option 1, which was to bring in 2 huge pit bull dogs from the capital city. The trainer had prepared them to patrol and chase away other animals, including wolves, wild boar, and bears. The trainer agreed to the deal and introduced the dogs of fearsome musculature and bearing, giving the following instructions. The 2 pit bulls were identified as P15 and P22. They were not to be given names because they were special dogs, bred for one purpose only, to drive out threats from the surroundings. They were not pets and would sleep only in the kennels built for that purpose. Finally, the public was advised to avoid petting them excessively. And of course, no one was to hit them because pit bulls could defend themselves. In just 1 week, P15 and P22 managed to drive the pack of abandoned large dogs to the other side of Route 8. None of them ever set foot in the area around Humidal again, and the inhabitants were more than happy. Sadly, the handler died in an accident in the capital city, and no one returned to control the animals. Juan Bautista, a kind-hearted young albino and the mayor's right-hand man, had to take charge of everything to do with the pit bulls. Of course, he soon grew fond of them, and by June 2007, he was treating them as if they were his children. The chaos began when the Trujillo couple went on holiday in the mountains. The hotel they had booked was pet-friendly, but they refused to welcome them with the Argentinian Dogo Argentino they had brought with them. The dog, white as clouds and with a bad temper, frightened the other guests. So the Trujillos had no better idea than to abandon him in a place far from prying eyes, which seemed ideal. The crossroads of Route 8 and the road to Humidal, as had become customary. However, it is believed that guilt caught up with them halfway, and they decided to go back to look for it. By the time they found him on the outskirts of Humidal, it was too late. The scene was a mess. The pug was dead, its hide torn in several places, and next to it, badly wounded, lay P15 and P22. The couple was one of those who made many bad decisions, because in their indignation and assuming that the Pitbulls were defenseless due to the severity of their injuries, they began to kick them. They could not have made a worse mistake. P22 jumped up and tackled the man, who screamed and screamed as he felt his left arm being ripped off by the dog's powerful jaws. The woman tried to help him without noticing that P15 was already on the run and bit her on the leg, severing the femoral artery. They both bled to death within minutes. Juan Bautista found them that same afternoon and deduced that the pug was not intimidated by his pit bulls and had put up a fierce fight. The rest was also clear. The right thing to do would be to alert the authorities. But he immediately imagined that the police would arrive in a hurry and slaughter his beloved dogs. So he decided to take them home to stitch up the cuts and nurse them back to health. Then he came up with a stupid plan. He returned at night with a shovel and a handcart, placed the bodies of the Dogo and the Trujillos on top, and pushed them silently to the old abandoned cemetery. He believed that its centuries-old reputation as a cursed place made it the perfect place to bury corpses because no one dared to go there. After digging a pit and dumping them there, he covered the site with dry leaves and drove to the road, found the couple's car and drove it for 15 minutes until it sank into the lake. For 2 months the plan went well. When relatives noticed the disappearance, they filed a report. The hotel in the mountains where they had reservations was searched, but the investigation made little progress. There were pictures of the Trujillos and the dog even on national television, but they did not receive a single piece of information that would allow them to know what had happened. The perfect crime? Of course not. While the Pitbulls recovered quickly, they now had hideous scars all over them, and the villagers began to call them the albino monsters. These dogs, who once roamed freely in the surrounding area and were celebrated by all, were now forbidden to leave their handler's house, and, to make matters worse, the rainy season began. The storms lasted almost 20 days. Lightning lit up the sky, transforming the nights into an imposing and gloomy spectacle. Mrs. Rufino saw them first under the lights of the storm. She said a pug with a huge unhinged jaw appeared and snarled in the gardens. Then she saw a man and a woman, pale as the moon, their bodies torn apart, pounding on her window, shouting at her, "Let us in! Our dog wants to play with you!" Mrs. Rufino hadn't been out much since her bicycle fall, but she was well informed and called the police immediately. When they arrived, she told them it was the Trujillos and their dog, the ones who disappeared. "I swear to you, I see their picture on TV all the time. They weren't ghosts or anything. It looked more like they had escaped from the grave." The 4 officers were young and fearful. As they listened to the witness's account, they looked at each other sideways with a frightened look on their faces. Fear is never good for making decisions at high speed, and it got worse. Hearing the sirens of the patrol cars from his house, The big-hearted albino thought they were coming for his dogs. So he took the initiative and was willing to turn himself in and tell all he knew about the missing dogs. Only if he was given assurances that P15 and P22 would not be put down. The Pitbulls were following him tight to his leg. Then it happened. The young policeman saw that pale being approaching with his arms raised, and with those dogs full of frightening scars in the darkness, and they became desperate with fear. And at the cry of, "Zombies! Zombies! Zombies! Zombies!" they opened fire, emptying their magazines on the three of them. The world's leading security forces covered the whole episode, bribing the inhabitants who allowed themselves to be bought off and threatening those who did not with lawsuits worth millions. When the CIA's non-traditional weapons division caught the real cursed zombies roaming around wetlands, they took them away for storage so they could use them as they saw fit. It seems that the agents were too lazy to dig a new grave, because poor Juan Bautista was buried together with P15 and P22 in the same open pit left by the Trujillos and the Dogo when they woke up as the living dead. Finally, I leave you this testimony from last year. I personally interviewed the protagonists. They are the Greedo family, Mom, Dad, and the 8-year-old twins who had decided to take a holiday in the mountains with Finn, a cute purebred pug puppy they had recently bought. However, the prolonged journey with the animal triggered a severe allergy in the children. They decided that enough was enough, and when they reached the Route 8 junction, despite the twins' screams and cries, the mother climbed down with Finn in her hand and went into the road to release him to his fate. A few seconds later, she came running back, trembling with the pug in her arms, and desperately asked her husband to accelerate at top speed to get out of there. What did she see? In the middle of the road, next to the sign saying "Wetland 2 kilometers," and in her own words, there was a pale man. There was a pale man with a body full of holes and 2 huge hellish pit bulls that started running towards me as soon as I tried to abandon the little dog. I swear I learned my lesson and I will never ever try to do such evil again.
I am the Doqmentalist, and this was Obvious Dogs and Their Dark Revenge. Special greetings to the channel members. Yes, Pierre Iván Ramet, José Balsino, Jimena, Dani Gardea, Rosario Huizache, Carlos Montes, Tlahuizcalpan, Gregia, Juan Jacobo, Matías Gabriel Riquelme, Miriam Romero, Eleonora Rosy Farías, Jonathan Pacheco, Yolanda García, Brenda, Zul, Evelyn Tisco, Verónica Pereira, Jesús Mora, Juan Luis Pernias del Campillo, Keimer Chávez, Álvaro Medina y Rosalinda Velázquez. Thank you, and see you next time.